Greetings, fellow geeks, nerds, and everybody alike. Welcome to the Tech Pod. Today, I want to talk about live service games, aka games that require a presence of a network in order to function. Now, this concept has been around for quite a while, but it wasn't until recent years, especially when PlayStation 4 and Xbox One first came out, that the concept of live service games really started to pick up speed and popularity. And that's pretty much what I want to talk about and basically voice my thoughts about it. Now, keep in mind, this is strictly my opinion. You can agree with it, you can disagree with it. I do encourage you to voice your own opinion. Just be respectful. Anyways, let's get started. So like I said, the concept of a live service game has been around for a lot longer than you may expect. Even in some cases, before the World Wide Web itself. One example that comes to mind is something called the Sega Channel. It was essentially a subscription satellite service for your Sega Genesis back in the early 90s, where you connected a coax cable to the Sega Channel little base thing that went into the cartridge slot. And essentially what that allowed you to do is to download Genesis games straight from a satellite connection, as well as allowed you to basically experience extra content for certain games. And I want to say the Super Nintendo, aka the Super Famicom, had a similar thing in Japan. I want to say it was called the Satellaview, and it pretty much functioned similar to the Sega Channel. The basic concept behind the Satellaview and the Sega Genesis evolved over time when the World Wide Web started to become a thing. Instead of connecting to a satellite, now you could use either a broadband or dial-up connection to basically experience online content and games. And one game that comes to mind that was the first of its kind was Phantasy Star Online for the Sega Dreamcast. At that time, it was probably the very first online-only console game, and a very successful one too. Later on with consoles like the PlayStation 2, we got other online-focused multiplayer games such as Final Fantasy XI Online. A couple years later, we would get World of Warcraft on PC, which, to be honest, is probably the biggest online-focused game to have ever existed, and really paved the way for modern live service games. Fast forward to today, and we have many options when it comes to live service games. And most of them are really, really good. These live service games have really shaped the social aspect of the gaming landscape. With the live service infrastructure, games can be constantly updated over time and constantly be adding new content, keeping the experience fresh and exciting. Unfortunately, not all good things last forever, and that is one of the big downsides about live service games, is when it's time to close them down, they're pretty much gone forever. And that has started to become kind of an issue with modern gaming, because all of these companies are trying to make it big with a live service game, and some have great success, others not so much. It has caused oversaturation with these online-centric games. One notable example that I can think of is a game called Concord on PS5. Now, I never played the game, but For you gamers out there, I think you know exactly what happened to Concord. So, Concord was supposed to be the next big team shooter on PS5 exclusively. Well, actually, I think it might have been on PC as well. I guess I'm not really entirely sure. There was a lot of hype behind this game. Maybe a little too much. But at the same time, with an oversaturated market, you kind of have to try to push yourself out there and show the industry why people should play your game over another live service game. And unfortunately, Concord just couldn't make it with the other live service games. And the game was shut down 2 weeks after it launched, which is incredibly unfortunate because if you look at the development history for Concord, it was developed over 8 years and on a reported $400 million budget. Ouch. I honestly can't imagine what it's like being a game company. You put all of this hard work into your video game and then you end up shutting it down 2 weeks after launch and refunding everybody who bought it. Oh God, I just can't imagine that experience. That has got to be awful. And the sad thing is, this is a new thing. We've seen countless live service games that have followed the footsteps of Concord, where just for one reason or another, they just couldn't make it. A couple that come to mind would be The Days Before, Crucible, Babylon's Fall, Lawbreakers, Crossfire X, Paragon, Knockout City, Evolve, Battleborn, and that's just to name a few live service games that were pretty much quickly forgotten after they were released. And you would think that game companies would learn from these blunders that they've been having with these live service games and do something different, right? Well, not entirely. So far, I've only talked about live service games that are strictly multiplayer centric, but there are also some live service games that were single player focused as well, which is the most baffling thing. It just doesn't make any sense. A single player game that basically requires online connection in order to function. Just why? Why? And just like these multiplayer live service games, there's been countless single player live service games that have failed miserably. We have Marvel's Avengers, Anthem, Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. In those examples that I just listed, like I said, these are primarily single player games, but yet they have a live service infrastructure at their core. And unfortunately, just like with the multiplayer ones, when these live service games shut down, a good majority of them, even though they are single player, it's pretty much unplayable at that point. Luckily, some companies have addressed this, and with the games that used to have functional servers, they would later patch the games to allow these single player content to be accessible even after the servers are shut down. But some companies, unfortunately, don't see this as an option. One personally that I can think of is a game called Star Blood Arena. It's a PlayStation VR game, and I honestly had no idea that it was an online-only VR game. It was fairly cheap. I got it for like $6. This was back when I first got my PlayStation VR headset, and pretty much I got through the tutorial, went to go actually play the game. Come to find out, it's online only, and nothing is accessible on the game anymore. And that just irritated me, to say the least. Now, luckily, I didn't buy the game for full price, so it wasn't that much of a loss. But the fact that it's not communicated for some of these games whether or not content is going to be still active or accessible after the servers are shut down. It just seems like with live service games, it's either all or nothing. It's a huge risk. It honestly is. And you would think with how many of these live service games exist, you would think that they would learn at this point, especially with how many just don't make it. It is good, though, that a good majority of these live service games, especially the multiplayer focused ones, are free to play. It is unfortunate with the single player focused online games or the live service games that are at full retail price. It's a gamble. It's pretty much a gamble. Yeah, it's cool that your game has online functionality to make the game feel more alive, I guess. But it's like there's a 50-50 chance that that brand new game that you just bought may be unplayable within a couple years at most. Maybe even months. I think some of these game companies, they see all of these successful live service games and it just all goes to their head. And then when their product fails, they're sitting there scratching their head asking what went wrong. So, what's happening with live service games? At least with the ones that are pretty much dead on arrival. Well, I think it's a combination of things. I think the reason why the industry has such an oversaturation of live service games is a mix of marketing fatigue, high development costs, and stiff competition. It's just like there's a lot of these live service games that just don't really differentiate themselves from more successful ones. Two of the most popular live service games that are still going strong to this day would be Fortnite and Destiny 2. And there's a reason why those games have been going on for as long as they have. Those games are constantly being updated, they're constantly getting new content, and just keeps the overall experience fresh and exciting. The developers care about their game and care about the players playing them. So if they want people to continue playing the game, they have to come up with new ideas. Now, I can imagine easier said than done. I can imagine that it's got to be pretty difficult in the modern gaming industry to come up with new ideas without taking big risks. I don't think live service games should disappear entirely. I think they're still a good thing. There's still some, like Destiny 2, that I enjoy playing all the time. But man, something just has to change. Honestly. It's quite depressing seeing all of these online-only games being oversaturated in the market, and a good majority of them just are a complete failure and just don't live up to their promises. It does look like some companies are starting to take note with the oversaturation of live service games. Sony in particular, they have been developing a multiplayer spin-off of The Last of Us for quite a few years now. And basically they're still developing it, but development has quote unquote slowed down for quite a while. And I think hopefully that means that they're giving it more time to kind of develop, so that way it's not a complete failure on arrival. And I'm really hoping that some developers are starting to take note of these single player focused games that require an online presence. Because this is strictly my opinion, but personally, I don't think a single player game needs online only functionality. It's unnecessary. And especially if that game ends up failing and the servers are shut down, that game is basically unplayable and gone. Lost of time. What a complete waste. So I think we'll end things here by saying live service games will never completely disappear. And like I said, I do think they still have a place in the gaming industry. But something has to change, at least if these companies want to continue with the success of their live service game. So that's pretty much all I have for this episode. Let me know what you thought. Thank you all for listening, and see you next time.